place as the campaign unrolled. The facts were all there. There was no need for imagination to be brought to bear on them, for the events were beyond imagining. Although it has, of necessity, been compiled from the recollections of old people, this is a story about boys and young men and women, many still in their teens, who were snatched from a safe and circumscribed world, still basking in the afterglow of those Edwardian summers when God was still in his heaven and a third of the Atlas was firmly shaded in the pink of the British Empire. This is their story, faithfully recorded as they remember their experiences, their thoughts, feelings and conversations, and they remember them vividly. The experience of that great war could never be forgotten. Perhaps Bill Fowler, who was a stretcher-bearer with the 13th Service Battalion, the Rifle Brigade, summed it all up when he said, "In a way, I lived my whole life between the ages of 19 and 23. Everything that happened after that was almost an anticlimax." Part 1. The Big Bang. Chapter 1. Before 1914, the ancient city of Ypres had been one of the gems of Flanders. Not that many people outside Belgium had ever heard of it, for in tumbling from its pinnacle as one of the great cloth towns of the Middle Ages, Ypres had also tumbled into obscurity, a sleepy backwater of less than 20,000 inhabitants, whose prosperity largely depended on the harvest of hops and corn and beets, growing on the plains beyond the ramparts that enclosed its medieval towers and high-gabled houses. 4 years of war turned Ypres into a ghost town. Not a leaf grew on a tree. Scarcely one stone stood upon another. From the battered ramparts, the eye swept clean across a field of rubble to the swamplands beyond. The jagged ruins of the Cloth Hall Tower, still pointing an angry skeleton's finger at the sky, were the only evidence that a town had ever stood there. By 1920, it was the booming mecca of the first mass explosion of tourism in history. The single third-class fare from London to Ypres was a mere £1.12 and sixpence, a little less than the average weekly wage of the lowest-paid workers. A package deal was even better value. For a 4-day excursion including travel, hotel, accommodation and meals could be arranged for as little as £3.17 and sixpence. In the 20s, tens of thousands of people travelled to Ypres, packing the cross-channel steamers to the gunwales, pouring into trains at Ostend and pouring out again at the shabby wooden sheds that served as a temporary station. In the face of such an influx, accommodation was a problem. The construction of hotels was naturally not at the top of the list of priorities in a city whose returning inhabitants were still living in cellars and huts, but there were inns in the surrounding villages and organisations like the YMCA and the Church Army, which had put up temporary wartime buildings in the area as canteens for the troops, turned them into hostels to provide for the needs of the post-war visitors. Their needs were simple, for they regarded themselves less as visitors than as pilgrims. They were mostly women, these pilgrims. Some of them were accompanied by a husband or a father or a son. More often, by a sister or a daughter, because their husbands and fathers and sons were already here. A whole generation of young men lay buried beneath the Flanders mud. Of the 1 million men who had been killed in the Great War, 250,000 lay in the few square miles around Ypres. Their graves marked the perimeter of the dreaded salient, which at all costs, and for no reason that in hindsight seems good enough, had to be held. It would be more correct to say that the cemeteries marked the perimeter of the salient, for the salient itself is a graveyard. Under its farms and woods and villages lie the unrecovered bodies of more than 40,000 soldiers.